all this week, we'll talk to David Bowie. In fact, we talked to David Bowie on Thursday afternoon. It's a very strange situation when you're doing an interview and you have to stop. We had to stop dead halfway through because Thursday afternoon was the day, certainly in the south, of the storms. We were in one of London's poshest hotels, and the noise just got so great that we actually had to stop recording for about 20 minutes and then go back to the business 20 minutes later. At his press conference last week, David said that he thought there were only 15 acts in the world capable of playing stadiums. We talked about that. We also talked about Kylie Minogue, and you can hear the second part of this 7-part interview a little later on this morning. Let's talk about those 15 acts in the world capable of playing stadiums.
Dear me, I can think of about 5. I was being quite gregarious there.
Yes, you were.
15 great stadium acts.
Not all 15, but 5 of them would be fascinating to hear.
5 of them as stadium acts.
Yeah.
Stones, without doubt, know what the stadium is all about. Springsteen, as a solo artist, is phenomenal in stadiums. I have a problem with the duration of his performance, which sometimes goes into a 4-hour period.
Yeah.
And my attention span, frankly, isn't that long. But he certainly has a feel, being self-imposed man of the people. I mean, he sets himself up in a way which is magic when it's put in front of like 60,000 people. I've yet to see Prince in that kind of size. I don't know. One feels maybe Prince would be, again, better in a more intimate surrounding. There's a delicacy with what he does, which is kind of the antithesis of the very muscular performance you get from Springsteen. I anticipate the Guns N' Roses will be phenomenal in stadiums. They were unbelievable with the Stones. I mean, they got such bad press, but I thought they were wickedly brilliant, and they're a very dangerous band.
Why dangerous?
Some of the song references and all that, but there again, you know, I mean, it's an artist isn't there to be morally right, politically right, or spiritually right. If he does put himself up in that position, he's either align himself with the government party, or he's paid to do that. You know, he's an artist for the state, or he's working for a dictator. I mean, we are up there to scream and shout about ourselves and at the world, and you make the best of it what you can. And they're certainly doing that. They are certainly doing that. A lot of young kids with very intrinsic LA street problems, and they capture what a cliche. They do capture the pulse of their audience. They are their audience. There's no doubt about it. There is such a strong feeling of empathy between artist and audience with that band. They're the foremost street band in America in that way, that if you are 18, you tend to dress like that and you tend to feel like that. And they express it so well. And it makes them a fantastic stadium band. I think that's probably the answer with the stadium band. When it is of the people kind of an artist, they tend to work the best.
All this week on Radio 1 between 10:30 and 12:30. Bits and pieces of the interview we recorded in a gale in one of the hotels in London on Thursday. Bowie looking as I've never seen him look before, not in the least bit pale, but just so well. Obviously excited about his new tour, excited about the Tin Machine concept that he's coming back to at the end of this year, and still with a lot of questions to answer. We'll talk to him again tomorrow, Wednesday, Thursday and Friday. And on this segment, I thought it might be a nice idea to bring up the subject of the Delinquents film project. Now, the Delinquents, as everybody knows, stars Kylie Minogue. A lot of press reports for a while saying that David Bowie was going to become involved. So I asked him about it.
I think we can put that down to what's euphemistically termed a large artistic disagreement with the producers in the way that it was going. The book that I had originally read and the film that I hear has been made, I have fortunately not seen it, so I cannot give you an opinion. I did see the Rushes.
Did you?
That was the point that I pulled out, because they bore no relation to each other. The book that I read and the film that they were making had nothing to do with each other, and I just couldn't. I couldn't find any foundation for continuing working with them. They had their own way of wanting to do it, and it certainly wasn't mine.
The book is a very charming, rather Edwardian Australian book that is required, or was required.
It's interesting that you picked Edwardian. In fact, you know, she came from a very strong line of socialist thinking. So there was some there was an effort to put her understanding of working class Australian society in perspective through her eyes, and it was a committed effort, and it was a wonderful little book. It really was a wonderful little book, and it should have been a little film.
Yes.
And it should have been an Australian film. There was no room in it for an American who says, I want to get out of this country. And you think, oh, yes, please go away.
You have seen the film.
That was the rash that I saw. And it was that one line that just finished me off.
But having said that...
And I will do something which is probably not popular, which is I will defend Kylie Minogue. When I was told that she was going to be cast as the female, I said, oh, yes, she's a Chinese Australian. That obviously is completely the right kind. I was very cynical. And then they showed me her test clip. And I thought, do you know, if she gets the right leading man, she might actually carry this off. She might actually carry this off. And I feel probably that I feel very disappointed for her if subsequently it is a horror. Having spent a lot of time in Australia, I'm not so convinced she's just part of Neighbours, you see, because over there she's fairly well known as an actress. And she's done a lot of other work. And we've seen a lot of her things in Australia from when she was like 10 years old. And she's worked as an actress for a very long time. And she's more than competent, you know. And she will survive it. She will survive it. I just feel sorry that it didn't go the way I would love to have seen it go for both her and the book, you know. It was unfortunate.
You're talking about Kylie Minogue, and highly complimentary about Kylie Minogue. We'll talk to David Bowie again tomorrow at 11:45. Have no idea what's going to be in the tape. Just got to get the lawyers to have a listen to it. That's David Bowie. Interestingly enough, when we announced that David Bowie was doing one concert, as he was originally, in London, that concert sold out in 8 minutes. Bowie's main hobby or obsession became fairly clear, and that is that he really is absolutely into travel in a big way. He owns an old Volvo, which he's driven around Europe in. He actually has a yacht in the Caribbean, and the yacht really is I guess it must be a tax deal, because he doesn't bother about the yacht too much, but the Volvo he goes around everywhere in. Generally, he seems to be on the move always, leading a fairly nomadic lifestyle. So I asked him where this passion for travel came from.
I think, like a lot of other kids, when I was quite young, people like Joseph Conrad really moved something within me that made me want to move. I mean, the romance, the trepidations, the sense of adventure that contained within that book, and Rudyard Kipling, I have to admit, I know that's not quite the kind of name that one should throw around anymore, reactionary old fart, but on the other hand, he wrote a good book, and it inspired me to, I've always wanted to travel. I mean, as a kid, Tibet was somewhere I always pictured as being somewhere great to go, because it was so. No, I still haven't been there. I got to know a lot of lamas when I had my 3-minute flirtation with Buddhism when I was an 18-year-old. I got to know one of the newly arrived lamas from the Patala, called Chimi Yangdang Rinpoche, who I believe is still here and does translations of the old Tibetan scrolls for the British Museum. I think it's their chief Tibetan translator there. And I do hear from him from time to time. I saw him about 5 years ago. It was the last time, I must admit. And running into him and finding this peculiar energy, which is a passive energy, the energy of the East, the energy of the Buddhist or the Hindu or the animist. I found it so entirely foreign to my code of conduct and my sensibility that I really wanted to explore it. And particularly going to the East had fascinated me from that point. And I got to see some of it, fortunately, not enough as I'd like. I still haven't done China.
You haven't done China?
No, I've never been to China. Nearest I got was Hong Kong, you know. That kind of
what happens when you're at home? Do you get the feeling, right, I must go book an airline ticket, go to the airport and go, or do you get in the Volvo and travel off that way?
Well, not to China. But yes, I have driven through all the great forests in Germany and down the Rhine and all that, and through France and Italy in my own car, yeah. I drive considerable
What do you do?
amounts.
Do you stay in the sort of, the 2 up, 2 downs? Or do you...
Guest hofs, whatever's available, right. Yeah. And when I'm in the East, I tend to stay very much away from the well-trod areas. I mean, so I went to Bali just before. I went to Australia first on a trip before I started recording there with Tin Machine. I went there for a month with Melissa, my fiancée, and Coco and her boyfriend. And we went through the Kakadu National Park, and we explored the whole of the north, east, and north of Australia. And we went up the Gold Coast, and that was just a fantastic insight into another kind of Australia, not
Did you
just
take
the bush. Yes, I took a lot. I do take a lot.
Do you take photographs of yourself?
No, never.
Smiling broadly at the camera,
no.
tourists.
I'm not in one of them. No, I take real pictures. I just go for the shot. I want the volcano as it's bubbling over.
So it's geographical locations rather than churches or graveyards or
I'm firstly drawn to the romance of the history of the place and its culture. I think the first two things that inspire me. And inevitably, when I get there, it's the people themselves that become more important than either. Because when you start to meet the people, that's a lovely word.
But aren't you lumbered immediately? They'll recognise you.
Not in Indonesia.
Okay.
I don't have much of a problem in Java.
But in Australia, they recognise you.
In Australia, yeah. Well, that's another reason why one goes to North Bali and not South Bali, because South Bali has virtually been taken over by... It's sort of the Australians' Hawaii or Florida. I mean, they just flock over there to Kuta Beach and salmon and all that. But once you get past the art, the so-called art village of Ubud and start going further afield, it's pretty much, I would imagine, what it was like about 400 or 500 years ago.
When you go to the national parks in Australia, does that make you more aware of green issues? Are you concerned about green issues at all?
Yes, I am, and typically with me, I feel ambivalent about it. In as much talking about it, it worries me that how many times can you say a truth before it just becomes dissipated? There's a point where you actually hear people say, "Oh, not again. We had enough about bloody rainforest."
Yeah.
And that's the danger point, because then the issue just slips away. Ethiopia was so fashionable for that 1 year. It's as dire a problem as it ever has been once again this year. But it means naught. It's not a light. Hardly gets a mention anymore. And that's the one thing that's so confounding about a truth.
Maybe the cliche was in the question, not the answer. I mean, environmental, again, there's another word that's a turn-off word, isn't it?
But yes, I mean, he says puffing another cigarette. I mean, it's something that I now, because of others' efforts, not my own, I'm in that particular area, I'm a follower, not a leader. But I have been made aware. And I was made more aware this time when I went to Indonesia, when I heard about the immense numbers of cutters that have been sent into Irian Jaya and will probably hack that entire country down within a couple of years. And that's an enormous forest there.
Difficult question, but favourite country. By favourite country, I don't mean favourite country to live in. But if I gave you an air ticket now, where would you go?
Currently this week, I think either the east coast of Java or North Bali. The reason for that, as an artist, is that I probably produce my best work when I'm in a situation that I don't understand too well, and an environment I'm not altogether familiar with. I'm lousy when I'm in London or LA. Yeah.
Why?
Yeah. The work becomes flaccid and it doesn't have anything, and there's no substance to it. And I try to write in Canada. As much as I love Canada and its people, it's very hard to get a vibe there of any consequence that sort of, unless you're sort of forced to live there, I guess.
Let's talk about David Bowie's formative years, which is the kind of thing that you see in Q magazine. About 20 years ago, there was a lot of rumours flying around, I suppose fueled to a great extent by David himself, about whether or not he was sexually ambiguous. Yeah. He often dressed as a lady, very often on stage, and there was an awful lot of doubt about just which way he was going. And I wondered when we were talking to David Bowie if he was confident with being a bloke, really, these days. After all, there's an awful lot of hassle about sexuality in the 1990s, a troubled climate.
Yeah, I mean, I was a child of the sexual revolution.
Yeah.
And for me, I'm very dubious about how a problem like AIDS possibly could be maneuvered into such a way that it produces a new kind of reactionary mentality. It's indeed a terrifying and crippling disease, but we must also be careful that our concerns about that particular disease are at least altruistic.
You're talking about paranoia against gays?
Yeah. Also ostracizing certain elements of our society. I think it's a really strong possibility that kind of situation could develop all over again.
Ian Charleson died recently, as you probably know, and he died of AIDS. And to my understanding...
Right now, one of our great American artists, Keith Haring, is dying of AIDS.
Isn't there?
And is is contributing a lot of really good written work to that particular problem.
But there was no public backlash here. Nothing but sympathy to Ian Charleson, or for Ian Charleson, and his family.
Yes, as a personality, yeah.
Doesn't that show...
I think when people are faceless, it's easy to hate.
People often forget that David Bowie, the rock superstar, also has a teenage son, and that teenage son is about to take his A-levels. Taking your A-levels is never any fun. And I asked David if he thought that Bowie Jr. would pass those exams.
I would hope so. Got a lot of O-levels.
If he doesn't get his A-levels, what will Dan say?
Never mind. Never mind. It's simple as that. You know, the one thing that probably... If I had anything important to stress with him, and I'm not so sure that I do, bar communication. As long as we communicate, I think that's the most essential factor. I'm not sure that whatever advice I have to give is not tarred and stained by too many bruises from the past, but I don't know. Maybe some of it is valid, some of it isn't. But I think one thing that I would say to him, and I have told him, in fact, is that whatever decisions he makes now are not irrevocable. That he does not have to wake up every day and think, what am I going to do for 40 years? You know, whatever decision I make now, that's it. You know, there's a lot of room for manoeuvring at this age, at 18 years old. You know, it's a great age, and you should be freed of the feeling that you don't have to make those really important decisions now, because there's so much stress given to that. So many parents will say, yeah, you better shape up, boy, you know, shape up or ship out, you know, pull your socks up, do this, do that. And I'm not a liberal father, but on the other hand, I'm not an Edwardian or Victorian father. I know which was worse.
But why you zigzag so much from one thing to another?
Yes, and it's an adventurous way to live, and it's not necessarily a good way for everybody. I mean, it's provided me with ultimately some of the best and worst moments of my life, but that's my choice, and it's been wonderful to do that. And no doubt I will continue to zigzag for the rest of my life, because I'm of that nature. I'm like that. I do that.
Is there an artistic worst moment you can remember? A moment when you thought, oh my God.
Well, until I had to learn to live with it, I think the re-release of Laughing Gnome almost crippled me.
You might have to sing that on stage, actually.
It was, I know, well, I did put the proposition forward.
Would you?
I thought, I better get in first here.
If they vote for it, will you sing it?
Might use it as intro music. We'll have that outro music.
So let's talk about this business that Jonathan King was discussing in his column this morning. I wondered when I spoke to David why he decided not to perform any of his old material after this tour, why it was the end of the road for all the classic songs. And I suppose also why he decided to embark on the tour in the first place.
It's a twofold reason. One is the obvious one, is that Ricodisc and EMI between them have collaborated to put out all the old material that I've had sort of stockpiled over the last few years. When it came off RCA, I sort of sat on it, not quite knowing what to do with it. And I had approaches made to me by several big companies to put it out, but it was going to be packaged in such a way that I felt it wasn't the kind of quality that I wanted for my work. Having then seen the stuff that Ricodisc with Jimi Hendrix and Frank Zappa, I thought that I'd never seen archive stuff presented, cared for, and digitally remastered like that before. I mean, it's absolutely superb.
Can you explain that? Because a lot of people wouldn't know what you're talking about.
Well, they transfer the tapes to digital process, which means that you get pretty much the sound that was happening in the studio when you were actually recording them. It's far superior to vinyl. And their research team is splendid. They unfortunately, sometimes come up with tracks that you've forgotten about and sometimes wish that they'd remained forgotten. But looking at them in a different light, some of them, it's quite fun to be able to put obscure tracks on each of the new albums that's coming out. However, so they wanted to do a compilation of all the best-known songs. I stay away from hits because I've actually not had that many. I've had 2 number ones, yes, in America. But things like Changes, which were never singles, are just as well known as, say, a Gene Genie or something like that. So it was a combination of what you can call hits, and favourite songs. And so they put an 18-track album together of that. And they asked me if I'd be willing to support it. And I said, yes, because I can think of a good use I can put this to. There has to be a point, rock and roll gets older, as myself and some of my peers have proven, we've got past into our 40s now, that we can either follow the traditional way of working with our repertoire, which is like a Frank Sinatra or a whatever. You go on forever singing your legacy of songs and all that, which is the way that it can go. Or we can decide to do the kinds of exciting and maybe risky things that we were known to do when we started working in music. So I thought what I would do is do these songs for the very last time, purposely painting myself into a corner and giving myself no option other than to develop more new material that makes me wildly excited to continue, if I'm going to continue in music. Because I don't want to be just taking those like nostalgic walks through my career. This will be fun because I've never done it before. I've never done a show where I'm literally, in this particular instance, asking the audience to choose the songs. And I will do exactly what it is they want to come along and hear.
And Walt Disney Movies using Fame, the single, in a forthcoming... David Bowie, we've been talking to all this week as a result of an interview I did last Thursday week. And we talked about the phone vote. You know the idea of the phone vote. Basically what he's looking forward to is hearing from people who know his music and know him. He'd advertised the day that we actually did the interview, that he'd advertised the phone number. So I asked him what the idea behind it was.
I said, well, look, I think it would be great. I think I know what they want, but I think I can guess about 10 or 12. What do we do after that? You know, I mean, because some things that I'd like to do, I know like Joe the Lion, are totally obscure to most people, and it's not really the kinds of things they'd want to pay to come and hear if this is their choice. And they said, well, the simplest way these days, because the big thing in the States is the 900 line. And I said, okay, if that's what you want to do, we do it that way. Do you think it'll work? And the response so far has been dramatic.
Have you any idea what the most requested song is going to be in the back of your head?
My presumption is that it would be Fame or Let's Dance.
Not Heroes?
I don't know about Europe. Europe's a different kettle of poisson.
Yeah.
I don't know.
And you're going to give the money to charity?
Yeah.
Any idea which charity yet?
Mine would be Save the Children Fund, but I would like some of it split off to the Brixton community as well.
So it's the Save the Children Fund is going to get the money, and also the Brixton community. And David still doesn't know whether or not it's going to be the Laughing Gnome that gets requested as the most requested song to be sung on the tour by David round the world. Now, he's been recording in Australia. We talked about the Delinquents incident a little earlier on, and he's been recording with Tin Machine. I wondered how that had been going.
We did 25 songs in Sydney, and my presumption would be 14 or so will go on an album. And I've left the rest of the guys, that's whilst I'm working, they'll be reworking some of the songs. We're taking a little more finesse over it than last time. The songs should be finished about mid-year completely and mixed and all that. And then hopefully the album will come out about the latter part of this year, and we'll be going out to support it.
So this tour ends when? This is...
I believe at the moment... It ends in August. I mean, it's.
Then you rehearse and do Tim Machine.
It's snowballing a bit, but my intention is to then go straight into rehearsals with Tim Machine for that late year tour.
Keep you slim anyway.
Oh yeah.
commercial involvement with the experimental group Tin Machine, David Bowie has now resumed the solo career he abandoned after the release of Never Let Me Down in 1987. The new album, as adventurous and eclectic as anything he's done in his 30 years as a professional musician, was started at the beginning of last year, when his forthcoming marriage to the Somalian model Iman inspired him to write some spiritual music for their wedding service.
I guess that was the real plunge that caused this to be a solo album. Because of Iman's parents being Muslim, and her whole family is Muslim, and my family is Church of England, Protestant, whatever, however lapsed. And we were marrying in a church in Italy. It was important for me to find something that also wasn't, had no sort of representation of institutionalized and organized religion, of which I'm not a believer. I must make that clear. And so I started writing the music for the service that again, tried to reflect and incorporate the feeling that I felt that we had as a relationship and what our relationship meant to us. And it was strictly instrumental, but just to try and find those passions and those spiritual feelings that we had with each other. And doing that opened this sort of virtual floodgate of sort of other emotions and things that I kind of wanted to say and delve a bit deeper into the last 2 or 3 years of my life. And it by virtue of that, became an album of writings and even incorporating other people's songs to reflect the ways that I felt about things. I mean, Night Flight by Scott Engel, for me, was an absolutely accurate summary in a way of how I felt what our relationship was. It was something neither of us had really expected and probably didn't want. But it happened, and at our age, I'm 37, me 46, probably the last thing that both of us thought would ever happen to us. And it's a hell of an exploration and sort of this kind of adventure, and you don't quite know where it's going to take you to. And that song really felt like it, this kind of dangerous territory that we were embarking on. Oh crikey, what have we done now?
There's no hope. The moving has come through. The danger passing you turns its face into the heat and runs the tunnels. It's so cold. The dark, dark are pine dogs. The stitches torn and broke. The raw meat fisted choke has hit the bloodline. Glass traps open and closed on night flights. Broken decks, weather-faced pressed the walls. Be my love, we will be gods on night flights. With only one promise, only one way to fall.
David Bowie's version of Night Flights, first recorded by the Walker Brothers in 1978. Bowie was moved to write the title track, Black Tie, White Noise, during the riots provoked by the Rodney King verdict. He couldn't have picked a more dramatic moment to arrive in Los Angeles.
I got in with Iman the day the riots started and was here during the duration of them, and the feeling of both the inevitability of the riots because of the decision and the numbing quality of it all was quite... I think it really illustrated that so many people in America feel that they are unfairly imprisoned within the lower rungs of society, and it's a prison from which they see no real escape. And I think it really felt, because of that, felt like a prison riot more than anything else. All the beginnings of a revolution. From my understanding of what's been happening in America, blacks are now worse off than they were even 5-6 years ago. And one obviously pins a lot of hope on the new administration to not burst that bubble of enthusiasm that swept them into.
Getting my facts from a Benetton ad, looking through arrogant eyes. other's hands and die in the flame singing shall overcome. What's going on? There'll be some blood, no doubt about it. What will come through, don't doubt it. I look into your eyes and I know I won't kill you. I look into your eyes and I know you won't kill me. You won't kill me. You won't kill me, no. But I look into your eyes and I wonder sometimes. Putting on the black tie, looking out the white noise. Oh Lord, just let him see me. Lord, Lord, yeah. Let him hear me. Let him call me brother. Let him put his arms around me. Let him put his hands together. Reach out over race and hold each other's hands. Walk through the night thinking we are the world. What's going on? There will be some blood, no doubt about it. He should come through. I look into your eyes and I know I won't kill you. And I turn my back for I know you won't kill me. You won't kill me. You won't kill me, no. But I wonder why. Yes, I wonder why sometimes. Putting on the black tie, looking out the white noise. They'll show us how to break the rules, but never how to make the rules. Reduce us down to witless punks. Black tie, white noise. Fascist cries go black and white. Who's got the blood? Who's got the blood? Looking out the white noise. Ooh, yeah.
Black Tie, White Noise, a duet with Al B. Sure. As well as responding to the LA riots in the song, Bowie also acknowledges the enduring power of Marvin Gaye's classic State of the Nation album, What's Going On?
Yeah, it's a straight out and out homage to him, because I think of all black music, I guess that album by Gaye was really a milestone in the black voice being heard in the musical arena. It was such a stunningly committed album. And because of the nature of the subject matter of that particular track, I wanted to pay some kind of, due back to him.
Bowie's co-producer on Black Tie, White Noise is Nile Rodgers. Their last collaboration was in 1983 on the most commercially successful album of Bowie's career, Let's Dance. Nile Rodgers.
With David, what I want is a really great record that people love and they understand where he's coming from and where I'm coming from. And they go, wow, that's cool. I hear it. I hear the growth and the development. I don't want them to go, no, that's weird. It doesn't sound like China Girl. I don't want to hear that. But I know it's inevitable on some level. You can't help but compare it because, you have a record like Let's Dance. It's impossible to not compare it to that. And he and I, the first thing we did was sort of like rewrite this song. It's called You've Been Around. And we started writing, it's strange, like almost by like airmail or something. I always used to see these games of chess being played by two masters in remote corners of the world, and that's what it was like. David would call me from Switzerland and say, I'm sending the tapes to you. Now you work on them for a while, then I'll work on the stuff, then send it back to him in California. Then we get together for 2 or 3 days only, work on it together, then write a new song. And that's how we started the record in the beginning. And it was a lot of fun because you could work and then you could sit down and compare notes. And the thing that was really fantastic about David this time is that he was so at peace with himself and everything that had taken place over the last few years that once again we were doing the record and he was paying for it out of his own pocket, but there was none of that pressure. He didn't say like, well, now we got to finish this record in 2 months. He was like, I don't care how long it takes and how much it costs. As a matter of fact, something really funny that he said to me, which I actually think is brilliant, which sort of sums up his whole new attitude. He says, unlike the last time we did the record where we were concerned with every penny, this time he says to me, he says, Nile, let me know when we get to somewhere around $3 million. Because the way I look at it, we got about $4 million to make this record. I said, boy, that's exactly the opposite of before. No record ever cost $3 million, but he was dead serious. I mean, you could sort of sum up his whole artistic and personal and spiritual development in that one statement.
Where's the pain in the violent night? I'm depressed by the grin. I stay over many years. I should have thought of that. For the love of the money, like a black-hearted violin. It's the nature of being. It's too many lonely nights. I can't tell bad from wrong. I can't pass you by. To exchanging, you've been around, but you changed me. Where the flesh meets the spirit world, where the traffic is thin, I slip from a vacant view. I should have thought of that. And the sound of tomorrow, like a black-hearted violin, like the silence of tension. It's too many lonely nights. I can't tell good from bad. I can't pass you by. To exchanging, you've been around, but you've changed me. You've been around and pass you by. You've been around, but you've changed me.
After 11:30 tomorrow, more from David Bowie. David Bowie's new album was Jump, They Say, a song partly inspired by Bowie's stepbrother Terry, who was to take his life after a long history of mental illness. And that's where we pick up our conversation with David Bowie in this series of 3 exclusive previews.
I've attempted to at least get near the situation of his suicide, which for me was absolutely incomprehensible and probably something I refused to accept for quite some time because I hadn't made any contact with him, and I felt probably very guilty that I hadn't made any physical contact. I've lost that guilt now because I don't really believe that anything would have prevented his suicide. I'm not naive to believe that one man can really save somebody who's in such a state of absolute depression, that it can really be done. Everybody does have, in the end, control over their own lives and over their own destinies. But it has bothered me an awful lot. The song is not biographical by any stretch of the imagination. It's my impressions of what I believe I felt about Terry, and in conjunction of how I felt about myself, metaphysically jumping into things. So it was really a combination of both of us. There is a philosopher whose name I wish I could remember, who said that one creates the doppelganger so that you can inflict one's own fears and guilts and passions and the darker sides of one's personality onto that doppelganger, and then you kill him and hope by doing that you no longer retain those weaknesses and faults yourself. I feel that's probably played not a small part in my life. The idea of the doppelganger as being somebody that I can affix my own fears and paranoias on. Artists are really messed up, you know.
When comes the shaking man, elation in his eyes, striped with blood and emblazed tattoo, streaking cathedral style. They say, he has no brain, they say. He has no moon, they say. He was born again, they say. Look at him climb, they say. Jump. They say, jump. He has two gods, they say. He has no fear, they say. He has no eyes, they say. He has no mouth, they say. Hey, that's really something. They feel he should get some time. I say he should watch his ass, my friend. Don't listen to the crowd, they say. Jump.
Over the years, it seems that I've mythologized my stepbrother far more than and more actively than he actually took part in my life. I know that he did guide me towards reading a lot more than I read, and steered me to areas that I wouldn't probably have found on my own, things like Jack Kerouac and beat authors. And I know he had an interest in jazz, but I've subsequently read that I've said that he took me to jazz clubs, which is not entirely true. I would love him to have taken me to jazz clubs, but I just used to take myself to jazz clubs. I did, in fact, take him to a Cream concert at Bromwell Court, which would have been, I guess, 1967, something like that. And I was very disturbed because the music was affecting him adversely, because he was his particular illness was somewhere between schizophrenia and manic depressiveness. And I know that he was getting to a pretty tranced out state watching Cream, because I don't think he'd ever been to anything as loud as that in his life. And I remember having to take him home because it was really affecting him.
It's a mark of Bowie's lasting affection for Cream that he's chosen to revive one of their earliest tracks on the new album. I Feel Free was a song he used to play during his Ziggy Stardust days, making it a perfect choice for a jubilant reunion with his old mate from the Spiders from Mars, Mick Ronson.
I thought, well, if Mick and I are going to work together, let's try and make it mean something. give it some kind of, at least for us, may give it some depth. And I just picked on that one because that was an encore number that we used to do. The approach was dictated by the musicians I was working with. I mean, there was no way that it was going to be a copy of the Cream version. The guys infected it with such life that it was just a joy, because I was sort of a little cautious about approaching that song because it's such a sort of classic to Cream fans. But I really like the version we did. I think it's a whole new reading of it, and I think it's very successful.
David Bowie's version of I Feel Free, featuring Mick Ronson on guitar. Most of the other musicians on the album were working with Bowie for the first time.
Barry Campbell, the bass player, is totally new. He's a guy that Nile had wanted to work with for a few months. He'd found him working in a club in New York as a bass player, and I don't think Barry had done any studio work before, so he was a first time out. The young guy, great, wonderful bass player. Drummer, who coincidentally is also called Campbell Sterling. Sterling I'd known for a long time, actually, because he was the drummer for Duran Duran at one time. When Duran were touring with me back in, must have been, was that the 83 tour? I think so. I think Duran did a stretch with us up in Canada on that tour, and he was their drummer at that period. So I knew Sterling. And then Philip Sazy is a Frenchman who's been ensconced in New York for about 8 years. I guess he's the only session man that we used in as much as the the others are kind of working musicians outside of the studio. And he's a wonderful talent. He's been on more albums than one can think of. And the other guys, I guess, Lester Bowie, somewhat falls in the category of a Miles Davis type. He's an older guy. He's eccentric and plays much in the same style as Lester is incredible. He's quite experienced. We only brought him in because it was such a jive thing to do, like the Bowies together at last. And then he was such fun that we had him on like 50% of the album by the end of it. We'd only written him in for one song, just to kind of get him to guest on it. But he was great, really great. I mean, he's like also uncontrollable. I mean, he wouldn't listen to any of the tracks. And we'd say, you know, we want you to do this track. He said, don't play me no track. He said, I'm going out there. So just pump it through the speakers. And he would just play. Immediately start. He wouldn't know what key it's in, nothing. And he'd just play, and that was it. And you had to grab what, you know, and then when he finished the take, he said, that's it. You know, well, how about another take, Lester? Oh, all right, but just start it from the middle. Don't tell me where you're going to start it from, you know, and like anything to put him off his guard. He would make the situation so he was, you know, just jumping in at the deep end all the time. He was an extraordinary man to work with. And I had to follow him around the studio because he wouldn't listen on headphones. He'd have it playing through the loudspeakers. And so you had all this dreadful leakage coming through his microphone when you could get him on the mic. So you had to, like, this one take, we had one guy following him around with a boot because he's wandering all over the studio. I mean, he's something.
Looking for Lester, featuring the saxophone of David Bowie and the trumpet of Lester Bowie, who would tease David by comparing his sax playing to that of Bill Clinton. But Nile Rodgers, who co-produced the album, is rather more complimentary.
I actually happen to think his sax playing on this record is really cool. I think that what it is it's like David was trying to explain it to me, what he was going for. And he was saying how it was like a young kid when they get their first guitar and they plug in the fuzz box and they get all these great, interesting sounds. And artistically, they're experimenting with the sound. They love what they hear and they're just thrilled by it. And that's sort of conceptually what he was doing. You know, it's very processed. It's not just straight sax sound. It was like, you know, he wanted to be this teeny bopper with this, it's what he calls the dog sax sound. And that's what we wound up calling it, the dog sax. That's our special setup. And we know how to get it every time now.
In an album chock full of surprises, perhaps the most unexpected track is Bowie's version of the recent Morrissey song, I Know It's Gonna Happen Someday. So why on earth did he pick that one?
Well, he nicked one of my songs, so I nicked it back again. It's a fair cop. He did a lovely parody of Rock and Roll Suicide. He uses the same chord sequence at the end of this particular song on his last album, Your Arsenal. Coupled with the fact that Mick Ronson produced it, I could see what was going on there. And I thought, well, okay. And the sentiment of that song is not dissimilar to the sentiment of Rock and Roll Suicide, which is just have some kind of faith and things will work out. So I kind of knew where it was all coming from. And I thought, well, okay, if I were to do that song, I would do it like I would have done it in 1973, 74. So I've done a kind of a action or kind of derision. But he did say, it's very grand. which I would agree with him. It is very grand.
More from David Bowie. Same time tomorrow, around about 20 minutes to...
Burning up each other's love, burning up our lives. Tread up cans and working out. Miracle good night. Future falling empty, knocking on the door. Ragged men and hungry mama, miracle no more. Turn it around, make it alright. Nobody dancing. Morning star, you're beautiful, the yellow diamond high. Spend your night in my living room, miracle good night. Even cloud all alone, cause the rain can be. haven't got a death wish, just want a little more. Turn it around, make it alright. Nobody dancing. Miracle good night. Turn it around, make it alright. Nobody dancing. It was only make-believe.
I wish there was a sailor 1,000 miles from here. I wished I had a future anywhere.
I love you in the morning sun, I love you in my dreams. I love the sound of making love, the feeling of your skin, the corner of your eyes. I long forevermore, I never want to say goodnight. Miracle goodnight, oh, turn it around, make it alright. Nobody dancing. Miracle goodnight, turn it around, make it alright. Nobody dancing. It was only make-believe.
Don't want to know the past. Don't want to know the real deal. Really don't want to know that. Less we know, better we feel. That's just a relationship song. There's nothing very deep. I think the nicest thing about it is the riff. I mean, it's a riff that sort of will never, it just doesn't stop. It's one of those things that really grabs you, and there's no real point in going to anything else because the riff is strong enough to carry the whole piece, which indeed it does, to the point of repetition. Very simple song.
Morning star, you're beautiful, you're down on high. Spinning around my little room, miracle. Turn it around, make it alright. Nobody dancing. Miracle good night. Turn it around, make it alright. It was only make-believe.
Miracle Goodnight. And while Bowie is a little offhand about the track, his co-producer, Nile Rodgers, is thrilled with it.
I think it's an amazing song, and I think that when people think of what David and I would do, because a lot of times you have to think about what people think. David doesn't really think about that too much, but I give it a lot of thought, and I think that's my job. I have to be really responsible and sort of more down to earth and have to say, David, you're a wonderful artist, but let's do this. But the interesting thing, and I guess I'm really proud of him, is that he doesn't care. I mean, he's almost like, nah, if we put that out, people are going to say, man, you guys are just going for some commercials. And I'm saying, David, it's an amazing record. No one's going to say that. And if they do, so what? It's amazing. It's an undeniable, great smash record that you can't stop singing that little hooky harmonica guitar melody. And what David's going through right now is the music is making him very happy again. And because I've been a fan of his, I love to see that. It's funny, for me, one of the great things about this record, and there are many great things, but one of the best things was to see how happy he is and how wonderful and how artistically satisfied he is.
Talk to anyone in the Bowie camp and they'll confirm what Nile says. David is feeling very happy about his music, and that happiness has been intensified by a spiritual rejuvenation.
God is on top of it. God is on top of it. God is on top of it. That's all. That's all.
reverberating within me for some time. Maybe it's something that I'm acknowledging, not only in a way publicly, but also to myself. You know? That when one does turn oneself over to God in terms of that one doesn't have the control over life or the circumstances or relationships or anything to the degree that one wishes one could exert, I think it's inevitable that eventually you get to the realization that there is not necessarily something that we could conceive of as a plan, but there is an order in that which we perceive of as chaos. And that order comes from God. And I guess there's some voices given to that on this album, maybe in not quite such a pontificating manner. I'd hate to think that I was a deliverer of polemic. I'm not like that. I work on intuition and impressions more than anything. I think my writing has a lot to do with my impression of life rather than an accurate, clarified view of it. I'm not a Dylan, and I'm not somebody who can sit down and stoically write a clear picture of what's happening, you know. But I can leave a very strong impression of how I feel about things. Too strong sometimes. But this one I really feel is a fairly accurate reflection of my state of mind. It doesn't have the same pain as some of the other albums. There's almost a joy in there, which is nice to see peeking through at long last.
God is on top of it all. That's all.
The diversity of this album couldn't be more apparent than when you contrast Pallas Athena, Bowie's affirmation of his faith in God, with Don't Let Me Down and Down, his soulful interpretation of a Moroccan love song he'd recently discovered.
It was an Arabic album that was sort of lying around the house when Iman and I first met, and it was one of the songs that we were playing all the time. I adored it. I thought it was so quirky and sweet. They did it in 3/4 with, I don't know, bazooka and gong or something. I mean, it was a really strange little song. I put it into 4/4 and made it an R&B ballad, and it kind of worked. I mean, when I took it in the studio and played it to Nile, he couldn't believe that we could make a song out of it that would be sort of recognizable. But I saw this germ of beauty in it. I think it's a very sweet song.
Nile Rodgers.
The thing that was hysterical about this, I don't know if you'll ever get a chance to hear the original version of this song, but if you do, it's highly entertaining. It seems like these people just bought a drum machine and had no idea how to synchronize it. And they pushed the button and just let it play free with the band. And it's all over the place. It's just randomly playing. But in the midst of this sort of semi-chaotic track, there's this beautiful song, this incredibly haunting, beautiful song with cool jazz chord changes in the middle of this very chaotic, bizarre production. And we were hysterical with laughter, thinking like, how the hell did David hear this? I always wonder where he is. It's like God touched him or something. Where is he when he hears these things? Where is he when he runs across this kind of stuff? Because if I heard this thing, I'd immediately dismiss it and move on. But he heard it and was thrilled about bringing this to us. And we just all sat in the studio with these perplexed looks on our faces, and we were laughing. But see, the thing is that I've done this with him before, so I know that from a perplexed look, in a few weeks is going to be a really great.
Still I keep my love for you. No place to hide, no way to fall. Nowhere to lie, no words are wide. I'm sick and tired of telling you, don't let me down, down and down. Don't let me down and down and down. I know there's something in the wind, that crazy balance of my mind. What kind of fool are you and I? Scared to death and tell me why. I'm sick and tired of telling you, don't let me down and down and down. Don't let me down and down and down. Still I keep my love for you. Destiny, you jog in my memory. You haunting mind, no fade away. I'm sick and tired of telling you, don't let me down and down and down. Don't let me down and down and down. Don't let me down and down and down. I'm sick and tired of telling you. Still I keep my love for you. No place to hide, no way to fall. Sick and tired of telling you, don't let me down and down and down. Don't let me down and down and down. Still I keep my love for you. Don't let me down and down and down. I'm sick and tired of telling you, don't let me down. No, don't let me down. Don't let me down. Nowhere to hide, no place to go. Still I keep my love for you.
Don't Let Me Down and Down. Well, Bowie might adore that song, but he does have mixed feelings about what he calls the bonus track on the album, Lucy Can't Dance.
That's my least favourite track on the album. I can't help but tell the truth about that one. I didn't want to put it on the album, you see, but my record company really liked it a lot. And as we're new to each other, I didn't want us to fall out quite as soon as... Well, no, my track record's not bad. But I do tend to inevitably fall out with the companies that I'm with. And I didn't want it to start this early. So I said that as long as it wasn't in the body of the album, but if I could put it on as a bonus track, I'd let them get away with it. I like the lyrics. Don't get me wrong. The lyrics are good. I just find the tune so incredibly twee.
Nile Rodgers.
He hates it. He hates it. He doesn't even want it on the album, and I had to fight. It's amazing that this record has been a battle. He and I, we fight every day because, like I said, to him artistically, he's completely satisfied, and he'd be thoroughly happy without Lucy Can't Dance on the record. He'd be fine. And I had to beg and beg and beg and beg and beg. So finally he's put it on there, and I'm going, David, this is happening. To me, if we release Lucy Can't Dance, Miracle Goodnight, Black Tie, White Noise, we'd be sitting with like a huge record. You know, I'd be, ladies and gentlemen, yes, Nile Rodgers, thank you. I'd like to thank the Academy. I'd like to thank Mr. Bowie for giving me the chance. So, but the thing that's interesting is that he doesn't, and I gotta say, I have a lot of respect for him. He's not worried about that. He's like, forget it. We don't need Lucy Can't Dance. I like going, yeah, we do. Sure we do. Let's put it out right now. I'd be fine with that. I'd be the happiest guy in the world. Put out Lucy Can't Dance, no problem. I think it's a great song.
Lucy, I know what you're going to do. Oh, Lucy, look what you're doing. I'm doing it too. but you still got me under your thumb. She can dance to the noise, but she knows what the noise can do. She can dance to the noise, but she knows what the noise can do. Pursuing your frenzy and it's all so boring. And the sexual buzz, we just go on top of joy. You look and you die in the blink of an eye. But I can't make you dance. She can dance, dance to the noise. She can't dance, but she knows what the noise can do. She can dance, dance to the noise. She can't dance, but she knows what the noise can. She can't dance, but she knows what the noise can. She can't dance, but she knows what the noise can.
Lucy Can't Dance. Opening the album as an instrumental, the wedding song is reprised as the concluding track, this time with a Bowie vocal celebrating his marriage and his newfound contentment.
I see this album as something that had to be written because of my initial wanting to write the church music, but it's not about the wedding. That was a starting point. It's far wider, it's far more diverse than that, because it prompted me into writing a lot more about the subjects and about attitudes and emotions and whatever that had been going through me over the last 2 or 3 years. I found that it became a source of woodwind and keyboard instruments that sort of dominated the album. I guess that would be a reaction to working with the highly aggressive guitar orientation of Tin Machine. And I don't know whether it's polarized the situation, but I would imagine that I may vacillate backwards and forwards in the future between Tin Machine and maybe a wider berth, other avenues that have now sort of been opened up to me on solo albums. And again, as always, which is always the most exciting thing, I haven't a clue what I'll be doing next.
These are silver wings. These are golden eyes. These are floating love. Angel for life. Dreaming alone, and I feel that someone just like a good boy should. I'm gonna change my way. For all the saints alive, don't I feel like a saint alive? She's not mine for eternity.
These segments of David Bowie in conversation previewing his new album exclusively to 1FM are produced by Kevin Howard.
1FM.